So with great pleasure, I introduce to you an award-winning storyteller and writer and author, Noah Baum.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So just those of you who are like feeling the panic growing about the storytelling class, I just want to clarify that in particular, the class that we designed for February is going to be slightly different than what we did last spring. And each session is going to be standalone, and the focus is not going to be so much on skills, but much more about building community. So it will be much more about sharing stories, kind of going into memories, no pressure, you know, it's not about performing, it's not about crafting the perfect story. So each session is going to be kind of like a standalone. So if you want to come to one, you can. If you will come to all 5, you'll have an even better time. So welcome. It's nice to have this little intimate group. I almost feel like it's an overkill with all the cameras and the microphones. But you know, since the beginning of time in particular, this particular time of the year has been a time for stories. When it gets darker and we gather around the lights and we look for the light. And I thought we'd start with just a show of hands. Does anybody here know about St. Nicholas Day? Oh, good. Okay, just one? That's it? Okay. Well, in many, many countries, especially in Northern Europe, December 6th, 2 days from today, is St. Nicholas Day. And it's been celebrated for thousands and thousands of years, especially with children. Oh. Somebody's having a really bad cough. Oh, we forgot to ask to turn off your phones, please. Thank you. So for thousands of years, people have been celebrating this special day. It's especially a celebration for children based on the many legends of the Saint Nicholas, famous for his generosity and his gift-giving. And the British Father Christmas, as well as the American Santa Claus, all have their roots in this early Saint Nicholas. Now in 1655, what we call today Albany, New York, was a Dutch colony. And it is said that during that time in Albany, New York, there lived a very famous baker. His name was Van Amsterdam. And why was he famous, you may wonder? Because he was really honest. His scales were always balanced. His customers always received exactly what they paid for. He was famous for his saying, no more and no less. You get what you pay for, no more and no less. And he was famous for his baking. Oh, he was an excellent baker, and especially his St. Nicholas cookies. Every year on the days before December 6th, St. Nicholas Day, and especially on St. Nicholas Day, Van Amsterdam's bakery would be packed. His cookies were famous. They were made of moist gingerbread with white and red icing, shaped the way St. Nicholas was known for the Dutch, tall and thin, with a tall red bishop's hat and a long red cape. And so the story begins when one day, right before St. Nicholas Day, Van Amsterdam was in his shop. People were lining up for those cookies, and an old woman came in wearing a tattered, torn black shawl. And she came up to the counter. She put some coins on top, and she said, I'd like a dozen of your St. Nicholas cookies. Very well, madam. And he took, very carefully counted 12 cookies into the bag and handed it to her. I asked for a dozen. You gave me 12. Well, 12 is a dozen, madam. You can give me one more. I am very sorry, madam. You pay for 12, you get 12. In my shop, everyone knows you get exactly what you pay for. No more and no less. Oh, she said, Van Amsterdam, you may be honest, but your heart is small. Keep your cookies. Keep them all until you learn to count again. And with those strange words, she stormed out of his shop, leaving the cookies and the money on the counter. That was so strange. He told his wife that evening about what had happened, and she said, well, you could have given her one more. What are you saying? What do you think would happen if I would just start giving free cookies to everyone? I will be out of business in no time at all. No, I have my reputation to keep. Everybody knows that when they come to me, they get exactly what they pay for, no more and no less. But the next day, when he put those trays of cookies into the oven, they came out burned. And by the time the people were lining up to come into his shop, he had nothing to offer. Tray after tray, those cookies came out burned. He was getting very nervous. He baked some pies. They came out sour. Bread, it fell flat. And day after day, this was happening. Nothing that he put into that oven came out right. Well, soon people stopped coming. And as the weeks and the months went by, no one was coming to Van Amsterdam's shop, and a year went by. He was barely making ends meet when St. Nicholas Day was approaching. And the night before, he went to sleep, and before he closed his eyes, he prayed with all his heart, please, St. Nicholas, please, just help me this once. And that night he dreamed. He dreamed it was a boy again. And there was St. Nicholas coming up the street with his long red cape and his tall red bishop's hat with two big baskets, handing out gifts right and left to all the children who were flocking to him. And it was so strange. He noticed in his dream, no matter how many gifts were coming out of the bag, it was always full. And then it was his turn. And St. Nicholas handed him a cookie, one of his own cookies, his St. Nicholas cookies, and he looked up and instead of St. Nicholas, he saw the face of that old woman. And he woke up. I've always given no more and no less. But why not give a little more? He couldn't fall back to sleep, so he went down into the bakery and he began again to roll the dough and put the trays into the oven, and this time they came out right. And he was so excited, he started to ice them with the red and white icing, and he put them out and opened the door, for there was nobody there. His reputation was gone. And there came that old woman. She walked right in with that tattered, torn shawl, came out to the counter and said, I've come for a dozen of your St. Nicholas cookies. Oh, madam, how good to see you again. And he counted 12 cookies into the bag, and then he put one more. In my shop, madam, from now on, a dozen is 13. Ah, Van Amsterdam, I see you've learned to count well. Surely you will be rewarded. And with that, she walked out the door, and just before the door closed, he thought he saw a hint of a red cloak. Soon word spread that when you go to Van Amsterdam's bakery and you pay for a dozen cookies, you get 13. And soon, all the other bakers in the county saw how prosperous Van Amsterdam was becoming, and they too adopted that habit. And you know that to this day, there are many bakeries where you can go, and when you ask for a dozen, you get one more. And that is a baker's dozen. So, this is a very special time of the year, in particular this year, because both Christmas and Hanukkah fall at exactly the same time. I grew up in Jerusalem. I grew up in Israel. I grew up in the Jewish tradition. And so I brought a tiny little menorah today. And it is not Hanukkah, but I will light those candles. Anybody here that celebrates Hanukkah? Can we have a show of hands? No one? Okay. Oh, my Jessica. So Hanukkah is a holiday that is celebrated for 8 days and nights to commemorate an event that supposedly happened in around 160 before the Christian era, in the time of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, when the Greek emperors wanted a statue of Zeus to be in the great temple up in Jerusalem. And there was a lot of assimilation at the time, but there was a group of people, the Maccabees, who fought against this decree and insisted on religious tolerance. They wanted to worship their own God in their own temple and not have it be desecrated in this way. And there began a rebellion. And after, I think, about 4 years, they actually won. And when they came to the temple, it was dirty, it was desecrated. The sacred light that was in the holy menorah that stood there, there was a gigantic menorah that had 7 branches. And in it, there was a light that was always kept. It symbolized the presence of the divine light of God, the presence of God in his temple. And there was special oil that had to be sanctified by the priests that was used for that menorah, for that big lamp. Well, when they came into the temple, Judah and his brothers, the Maccabees, it was dark, it was cold, hasn't been used for years, and they began to look for ways to begin to clean it and to light the light again. And there was no sacred oil. It was all spilled. And the story, the legend, tells us that they discovered a tiny little lamp, a tiny little jar that had enough oil in it to light that big lamp for just one night. They said, okay, one is better than nothing. They lit the menorah and began to clean, to rededicate the temple, and a miracle happened. And instead of lasting one night, the light lasted for 8 days and nights, enough time for them to finish rededicating the temple and making a lot of more of the sanctified oil. And so since then, we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days. And what we do, because it is so sacred, we don't just use matches to light the candles. We use a special candle that is called the shamash, the servant candle. We light the candle, and each night we add another candle. So just to make it nice and pretty, we're pretending that this is like the 8th night, so I have all the candles. So I'm just going to light them. I'm not going to say a blessing on anything because it's not really Hanukkah, but I'm just going to light it so we'll have some light. Is that okay? Yes? Oh, thank you. You know, storytelling is a participatory art form.
We like lights and windows.
I know. You are so human. Okay, here we go. This is my baby menorah. I have a bigger one at home, but I don't know why I decided to bring my baby one.
The travel size, huh?
The travel size. Oh, wait, I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm lighting it. You see, because it's not Hanukkah, I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm feeling like, oh my God, I'm doing like lighting the candles when it's not Hanukkah. There must be a punishment somewhere for that. Anyway, you're supposed to light it with this, so ignore me. But what I do want to do is share a little story about Hanukkah with you. So one of the things that we do in this holiday is we light these candles and then we eat a lot of deep fried food. Don't you love it? Because of the miracle of the oil, right? So especially in Israel, we eat like these delicious sweet donuts that have jam in the middle. But here in the United States, the more popular food for Hanukkah is potato latkes, potato pancakes. They're called latkes, which is the Yiddish word, which is the language spoken in Eastern Europe by the Jews. It's a mixture of German and Hebrew. And here in America, you eat it with sour cream and applesauce and honey sometimes. But in Eastern Europe, traditionally, nobody had applesauce, but people had prunes, and they would make a special jam made of prunes to smear on the latkes. So here's a story about a Hanukkah jam miracle. And it's based on a story by Isaac Bashevis Singer, so I think this one also we may not be able to put online, but we can talk about that. I forgot that that's what I'm telling. Oh, have you ever heard of Chelm? Anybody ever heard about Chelm? Okay. Well, Gaitzel was a Chelm sage. Now, you're probably not familiar with that. You see, Chelm, well, there's actually a real place in Poland called Chelm, but Chelm in the Jewish mythological imagination is a town filled with fools. But they don't know that they're fools. They are wise sages. And when I was a little girl, if you do something stupid, like, put your right shoe on your left foot, my grandmother would laugh and say, Chelem Chuchem, a Chelem sage. The sages of Chelm are famous. They're the kind of people that, for example, like Gaitzel, they're so wise and so occupied with the deeper questions of life. They spend days, sometimes months, and maybe even years contemplating on the real important questions. Like, what is it that makes the tea sweet? Did you ever think about that? See? It's because you're not Chelem sages. What is it that actually makes tea sweet? Is it the sugar? Or is it the stirring of the spoon? Chew on that one. It all started way back in 1655. That is a little example of the things that occupy the sages of Chelm. Now, Gaitzel was a Chelm sage. And not only was he excellent at this type of pondering, he experimented. And he came to a conclusion that it is absolutely, definitely the spoon. Well, why put the sugar, you may ask? Well, so that you would know how long to stir the tea with the spoon until it melts, right? So that's what Gaitzel loved to do. He would just love to spend his days pondering, experimenting, thinking, contemplating. And there were two other things that he was really, really good at. He was good at sleeping, and he was brilliant at eating, and especially sweets. There wasn't a sweet thing in all of Chelm, and for that matter in the entire world, that Gaitzel would not touch. Oh, he loved them all. Now, by now you're probably wondering, if all he did all day was ponder and sleep and eat, how did he provide for his family? Good question. He had a wife. Shosha. Shosha provided for them and their little baby. She would go to the market to sell vegetables every day, and Gaitzel, he would stay at home, take care of the baby and the rooster, their only possession in the world. I forgot to tell you that the people of Chelm are very, very poor. And there he would, take care of the baby, take care of the rooster, and he would do what he does best, contemplate and sleep and eat. Now Hanukkah was coming, and Shosha stayed up very, very late one night to make her famous Hanukkah jam made of prunes. She stirred it with a lot of sugar until it became very, very thick and delicious. And then, knowing her Gaitzel, she put it in a pot on the highest shelf in the little room where they lived. And the next morning, before she left to go to the market to buy the vegetables, she had to make sure that he does not touch that, or else they'll have nothing for Hanukkah. She knew his sweet tooth, so she said, Gaitzel, I have something very important to tell you. Are you listening? Yes, Shosha, I'm listening. Good. Gaitzel, I need you to make sure the baby does not fall out of the cradle. Be very careful, okay? You need to take good care of. Oh, Shosha, of course. I'll take care of our baby. I'll make sure she doesn't fall out of the cradle. Good. Now there's another thing. Are you listening? Yes, Shosha, I'm listening. Good. Don't let the rooster out of the house. It is too cold out. No, Shosha, I will not let the rooster out of the house. Don't worry. Good. Now, Gaitzel, there's another very, very important thing. Are you listening? Yes, Shosha, I'm listening. Good. Do you see that pot up on the shelf? It is full of poison. Did you hear, Gaitzel? Poison. It's very dangerous. Do not touch it, or heaven forbid, you will die. All right, Shosha, I heard you. I won't touch the poison. Good. And off she went to the market. Well, Gaitzel fed the baby, and then he put her in the cradle, and he sat by the cradle, and with his foot he started to rock the cradle and sing a little lullaby. I lay you, schlaf sie ein, mein Gdule, mach die zu deine, eigelach die feine, which roughly translates into, I lay you, close your, go to sleep, my joy. Close your lovely, lovely little eyes. And all that rocking and the singing lulled the baby to sleep. And all that rocking and singing lulled Gaitzel to sleep. And in his sleep he dreamed. Oh, he dreamed that he was rich. So rich that he could have potato latkes every single day of the year, and not just on Hanukkah. He was so rich that all the people of the town, they came to him, they bowed on their knees, and they begged him to be their king. Well, what could he do? He couldn't refuse. And so they sat him on a throne, and they put a golden crown on his head, and Shosha, they made her queen on a gold throne right next to her with a gold crown on her head, and in they brought a platter piled high with steaming potato latkes smeared with jam. And each latke was so big that he and Shosha had to lift it together And he had to take a bite from one side, and she had to take a bite from the other. And he took a bite, and she took a bite, and he took a bite, and she took a bite, and he took a bite, and she took a bite, until their lips met in the middle. And just as he dreamed about that sweet meeting of the lips, there was a sound that awoke him. Bell, bell, bell. Was that a bell? Fire. Oh, 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 fire. Gewalt. He jumped up to open the window. Well, he overturned the cradle. The baby fell on the floor, started to scream. The rooster flapped his wings, flew out the open window. Wait, come back. He looked around. There was no fire. The baby's screaming. He picked her up. Sha, sha, sha. Ay, 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 ay. There was a bump in the middle of the baby's forehead. Well, he somehow managed to calm her down, and he put her back in the crib, and he sat and he rocked her back to sleep. I lay, you lay, schluf the lay. And as she fell asleep, the reality of his situation dawned on him. Oi. Oi. The baby has a bump, the rooster is gone. All his promises to Shosha. She'll come home, she'll be so angry. And when Shosha is angry, she raises her voice. And when she's angry, she calls him a noodlehead. And a schlemiel. You know, a schlemiel is somebody who's kind of a noodlehead. And she's never gonna forgive me, he thought. I'd rather die than face her anger. That's it. I'd rather die. But how? Well, right then and there, he decided to end his life. And he looked around for a way to do it, and then he remembered. The poison. I'll poison myself. Let her be angry. Let her call me a noodlehead. A dead Gaetzel does not care. And so he climbed on a chair and he brought down that pot and he braced himself to the bitter taste of death. But it was sweet. Well, Gaetzel was a reasonable man. He reasoned, that's because it's a very strong poison. And it wouldn't hurt to eat a little more. And as you could imagine, he licked that pot clean. And then he lay on the bed, waiting for the pangs of pain and for the angel of death to take him away. But all he felt was thirsty. Well, to drink, he had to go and get water from the well, which was his chore, which he forgot to do with all the hullabaloo. But a dead man cannot be expected to go out into the cold and bring water from the well. He remembered that they have a bottle of apple cider. Every year they scrape and save for a bottle of apple cider for Hanukkah. Shosha keeps it under the bed. He knows exactly where it is. He reached under the bed. He brought that bottle and he glug, 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 finished it. And now he did feel a little bloated. And he thought, that the poison should be so sweet. And so slow that he closed his eyes and he was just about to doze off when he heard a voice. Gaetzel? Why is it so dark? Why didn't you light the lamp? Gaetzel, why is the window open? Oh, Gewalt, why does the baby have a bump on her head? Where is the rooster? Gaetzel, what are you doing on the bed? Shosha. It's all right. Don't be so angry. Soon I will be dead. Dead? You look as healthy as a horse. That's because the poison is so slow. Poison? What poison? the poison that was on the shelf. I know you will never forgive me for breaking all my promises, and so I poisoned myself. Well, when Shosha heard that her Hanukkah jam is gone, she burst out crying. And that made Gatesel start crying too, but not from sadness, from joy, for he will live. And all that crying woke the baby, which started to scream, and that brought the neighbors. And when they heard the story, why, soon a neighbor came with a pot of jam and another with a bottle of cider. And with Shosha's delicious potato latkes, why, I believe they had a very happy Hanukkah after all. Jumana and I met on the green grass of America. It was a family potluck. She was holding her baby boy, I was holding mine. She had the kind of dark beauty that I recognized from home, so I walked up to her. What's his name? Tamara, and yours? Itai. Where are you from? Jerusalem. Near Ramallah, actually. I'm from Jerusalem, too. Her American husband stepped right in. My wife is a Palestinian, you know. As if I didn't know. But I didn't know if she'd want to talk to me. See, I grew up in Jerusalem, a divided city where the buildings are made of chiseled stones, white, cream, gray. I grew up in a state that came into existence only 10 years before I was born. I exist because that place, called Palestine before 1948, was ruled by the British, and they allocated only a small number of entry certificates to Eastern European Jews. My father's father, my grandfather Kamil, saw the writing on the wall. He managed to get those certificates and get his wife and his 2 sons out of Czechoslovakia. They left Prague in March of 1939, exactly 3 weeks before Hitler entered. My mother's father was wealthy enough to buy those certificates, and he managed to get his family out of Germany in 1936. But my grandmother's family, her 5 brothers and sisters, her parents, her 40 cousins, her aunts, uncles, her entire family was wiped. When I was a little girl, I used to lie awake at night, the what-ifs swimming through my mind. What if Saba Kamil didn't get those certificates? What if Saba Mordechai didn't get his family out in time? My entire being is such a huge, almost never. I grew up surrounded by wars. I grew up surrounded by a grandmother who, when she would hear the word Arab, she would say, "Tu, yimach shmam, may their name be erased. They took my Yaakov." Her son Yaakov was killed in the 1948 war for our independence when he was 22 years old. I grew up surrounded by these mantras. They don't want peace. You can never trust them. We have no choice. They don't want us here. They want to throw us into the sea. We have no choice. They only understand force. Arabs, they stab you in the back. Jumana and I met on the green grass of America. And for the longest time, we were mom friends, talked about the kids, the husbands. And then I started working on a story about my memories from 3rd grade in the 1967 war. And all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, I've known this woman now for 7 years. We both grew up in the same city, not even 5 miles apart, and I never heard what that war was like for her. Did she sleep with all the neighbors in the furnace room like I did? Did Palestinians even have bomb shelters? Well, I called her up, and a new chapter in our relationship began. I started asking questions, and even though she was very reluctant at first, the stories came tumbling out. And for the first time in my life, I heard what it actually feels like to be a Palestinian growing up under Israeli occupation. She told me how when she was 10, she saw a boy 13 or 14 years old being beaten by soldiers and driven away, and that was the first time in her life she understood the meaning of the word hate. And hearing that felt like someone just kicked me right here in the gut. Because those soldiers, so terrifying, the ones that haunted and terrified her entire childhood, were our boys. They were our symbol of security. Our heroes, everyone that I knew that turned 18 and went to the army, including my brother, suddenly my people were the them. It was painful, but I kept listening because she was telling me her story. And as we shared our stories, eventually we started talking about the history, those competing narratives of our people. I would say something that was the truth. She would look at me and say, that's Zionist propaganda. She would say something that's the truth, a fact from history. I would say, but that's not true at all. That's Arab propaganda. We argued. Then she said, look at us. We're getting defensive. We laughed. I picked up the boy, the baby, so she could make a soft-boiled egg for the two other boys, and we continued to talk. And that experience of our conversations, that experience of our ability to hold on to our compassion in spite of not always agreeing, it was so powerful that I decided I needed to do something with it. And I created a one-woman show called The Land Twice Promised, where I tell our personal stories and the stories of our mothers that echo the contradicting national narratives of our people. And what you heard at the beginning is the little opening of that show. And eventually I wrote a memoir about it that you can look at afterwards. But very quickly, after beginning to perform this show, I realized that my story is not about two moms meeting on the playground. My story is not even about Israelis and Palestinians. My story is about the power of stories, and the power of listening to the story of the other, even and especially when their story is difficult and when it can be difficult to hear. And so I began to use storytelling as a tool to build bridges in communities. And I started doing these interfaith workshops between Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And I was giving one of these workshops in Rochester, New York one year, when there was a Muslim participant from Pakistan, Dr. Bilal Ahmed. And he shared a story. Those of you who've been in my workshops know that I give these prompts to elicit stories. And so he shared a story about a special gift that he received from his father. And my jaw dropped when I heard that story. And I said, can I please have your permission to share that story in the world? And he gave me that permission. And I'd like to share that story with you now. Would you like to hear it?
Yes.
Thank you very much. This is the story of Bilal Ahmed, the Pakistani Muslim. Now, when Bilal was a little boy, he grew up in Lahore in Pakistan, and there was a war between India and Pakistan. And he asked his father, Baba, why is there so much hate between the Hindus and the Muslims? And his father said, when you're older, I'll explain. And when Bilal turned 13, his father took the family to visit their uncle's house up in the north. And Bilal loved those visits. He loved his uncle's house. You see, his uncle's house was special. It was all in this inner courtyard. There was a beautiful, beautiful fountain in the middle of the courtyard. They had little straw stools around that fountain. That's where they would eat their meals. All the doors of the rooms of the house, the kitchen, all the bedrooms, they all opened up to this courtyard. And there was an open stairway that led to the second story, an open corridor there. And there were more rooms, all looking down onto this beautiful courtyard. But the best part about that house was the tree. There was an ancient banyan tree in the back. And he loved hanging out on that tree with his cousins. They would spend hours there, telling stories, jokes, just climbing to the top, having all sorts of contests. And he was just about to run and climb the tree with his cousins when his father said, "Bilal, come, time to answer your question." "What question? Come." And his father took him by the hand, and he led him up that flight of stairs, along that open corridor. And Bilal couldn't believe it. His father stopped in front of the only door in that house that was ever locked. It was the attic. But Bilal knew the truth. It was the jinn room. The jinn, the ghosts and the demons lived behind that door. That's why it was always locked. Baba, I don't want to go there." His father said, "It's all right, there's something I need to show you." And he unlocked that door and ushered him in. It was dark and musty there, a few rays of sunlight through the slits of the wooden shutters. His father turned the light bulb. He could see his grandfather's musket and helmet from the World War. And there was a big trunk there that his father now opened. And out of it he took a big leather-bound book. And he said, "Bilal, this is our Bahi, the book of our family's history. It is very old. It has passed through the generations from the oldest son to the oldest son. That's why it's here in your uncle's house. He's my oldest brother. Now I want you to open it and look inside. Be careful. It's very old." And so he opened it. And then he could see that there was a page with some names. And he could recognize his name, Bilal Ahmed Said, next to his sister Sarah, his brother Jamal, his father Ghulam Ahmed Sahi, his mother Naima Chima Sahi. "Hey, Baba, that's us, our family." "Yes," his father said, "that's us, our family. Keep looking." And so he kept turning the pages. And every page had about 10 names. And he could recognize a lot of them, his grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, people he knew, people he heard about, page after page of names. And after a while, he noticed that the names were different, and he was reading Singh Gurmeet Singh Sahi. That's not a Muslim name. "No," his father said, "that is a Sikh name. They are your family too. Keep looking." And so he kept turning the pages. And after a while, the paper was so old, it was almost disintegrating between his fingers. And he read, Anil. What kind of a name is that? That is a Hindu name. Hindu? Yes, they are your family too. Keep looking. And so he kept looking. And after a while, it was no longer paper, it was parchment. And after a while, he couldn't recognize the handwriting or the language, let alone the names. And he looked up at his father and he said, "Baba, I don't understand. What does this mean?" His father said, "You asked about the hate. Remember? And so I wanted you to see this. I wanted you to see that God lives in everything. And don't you ever let anyone tell you to hate another, because you can see they're all here. Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and Buddhists and Christians and Jews, they are all your family." Well, Bilal was 13. All he could think about was how to get to the tree and play with his cousins. And time went by as time does, and Bilal became a doctor. He married with 3 beautiful children. He left Pakistan. He settled in Rochester, New York, and his father passed away. And 2 years after his father passed away, he heard about something that was revolutionary at the time, the National Geographic Genome Project. Raise your hand if you've heard of that. All right, I am amongst my people. Today there are all sorts of web-based applications like 23andMe, Ancestry.com, ways for people to trace their genetic ancestry. At the time, it was just the National Geographic Genome Project. And you could send a swab from the inside of your cheek, they analyze your DNA, and they send you back a map that traces the migration of your genetic ancestors throughout time. And for an additional sum, because this is America after all, you can get your email sent to your genetic relatives, whoever is still alive in the world that shares your DNA, and they can contact you if they want. Well, Bilal decided to honor his father's memory, who was always so interested in genealogy and history, and he sent for the kit. Took a swab from the inside of his cheek, puts it in a little glass vial with a number on it, no name at all. He sends it out. And a few weeks later, the results arrive. And there's a map of the world just showing the migration of his genetic ancestors, and like each and every one of us breathing on planet Earth, they all began in Africa. Thank you, educated crowd. And from there migrated north over thousands and thousands of years to Ukraine, Poland, and Holland, and about 5,000 years ago settled in what today is India, and about 1,000 years ago settled in what today is Pakistan. And a few weeks later, he starts getting emails from his genetic relatives. And he gets an email from somebody called Morris Kresnow. And then he gets an email from somebody called Larry Freiberg, Jack Solstein, David Levitan, Barry Baum. Not Muslim names, right? Well, it appears that according to the DNA results, the closest genetic relations of Dr. Bilal Ahmed, the Pakistani Muslim, are Jews from a small village in eastern Poland. And it was then that he remembered. And he turned to his daughter, who was about 13 at the time, and he said, you know, when I was about your age, my father took me to our uncle's house to show me our Bahi, the book of our family's history. He told her the story. He's been telling the story ever since. He wants his children to always remember and never forget his father's words. Don't you ever let anyone tell you to hate another, because you can see they're all here. They're all your family. So Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy Hanukkah. Thank you.